We're about to dive into one of the darkest, most unbelievable chapters in American intelligence history. A secret war fought not on a battlefield, but inside the human mind.
Get this. For 20 years, the U.S. government secretly drugged its own citizens with LSD. Why? To figure out how to control their minds. Yep, you heard that right. For 2 full decades, from 1953 all the way to 1973, the Central Intelligence Agency ran a top-secret, totally illegal program using unsuspecting American and Canadian citizens as their guinea pigs.
And believe it or not, the story gets even more disturbing from here. Let's start with maybe the most sordid, messed up part of the whole project. A sub-operation with a name that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a cheap spy novel. Operation Midnight Climax.
So I want you to picture this scene. We're in a fancy San Francisco apartment. It's decked out with French posters. A man is there with a sex worker, but what he has no idea about is that he's just been dosed with LSD. And he definitely doesn't know that on the other side of a one-way mirror, a federal agent is just sitting there on a portable toilet, sipping a martini and casually taking notes. This wasn't fiction. This was a real CIA secret brothel, basically a field lab for mind-altering drugs.
And the man behind that mirror? His name was George Hunter White. He was this former journalist who became an absolutely ruthless narcotics agent. To the public, he was a hero in the war on drugs. But in private, he was the spy master of this totally bizarre operation. A guy known for his heavy drinking and, let's just say, his willingness to bend every single rule in the book.
And if you want to understand the mindset behind this whole thing, you don't have to look any further than White's own words. In a letter they dug up years later, he didn't talk about his work with regret. He talked about it with this absolutely chilling glee. For him, this wasn't just a job. It was a license to indulge his darkest impulses, all with the full protection of the U.S. government.
But here's the crazy part. This whole sordid operation, it was just the tiny tip of a massive, dark iceberg. Just one small piece of a much, much larger secret program.
So that brings up the big question. Right? Why was the CIA running brothels and drugging people? What was the endgame here that could possibly justify these insane methods? Well, those brothels, they were just a means to an end.
The real goal was something called Project MKUltra. It was officially approved back in April 1953, and it was basically a direct response to Cold War fears. You know, fears of Soviet and Chinese brainwashing techniques they'd seen in the Korean War. But it very quickly went from being about defense to being about offense. The CIA didn't just want to resist mind control, they wanted to weaponize it. They wanted to figure out how to manipulate foreign leaders, create assassins out of thin air, and pull secrets from literally anyone.
And the architect of this whole twisted project was a man of just wild contradictions, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. On one hand, a brilliant biochemist, a PhD from Caltech. He also had a clubfoot and a stutter. But inside the agency, they called him the Black Sorcerer. This was the guy who personally cooked up poisons meant for leaders like Fidel Castro and Patrice Lumumba. He was the dark, beating heart of MKUltra.
And the scale of this thing, it's honestly staggering to think about. Gottlieb was in charge of 149 separate sub-projects. He was funneling money through all these front organizations to over 80 different institutions. We're talking prestigious universities, hospitals, prisons. He hired 185 researchers. And get this, many of them had no clue their funding was coming from the CIA. MKUltra was this hidden, sprawling network just woven right into the fabric of American life.
And right at the center of this web were the experiments themselves. Horrific experiments conducted on human beings, almost always without their knowledge or consent. This was a blatant violation of the Nuremberg Code, the very same code the U.S. had championed after World War II. The irony is just staggering.
So who were they targeting? Well, as you can see, the CIA preyed on the most vulnerable people imaginable. Mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, prostitutes. They even secretly dosed their own agents and military personnel. As one CIA officer so bluntly put it, they picked people who couldn't fight back. I mean, in one case, they gave a mental patient in Kentucky LSD for 174 days straight.
But the program's cruelty really hit a terrifying peak up in Montreal. The CIA was funding a Scottish psychiatrist named Dr. D. Ewan Cameron, who, by the way, was the president of the American Psychiatric Association at the time. His goal was to literally erase a person's mind and then rebuild it from scratch.
His method was nothing short of brutal. Patients, some of whom had just checked in for minor things like anxiety, were put into drug-induced comas that lasted for weeks. Then Cameron would hit them with these massive doses of electroshock therapy, sometimes 30 to 40 times the normal power.
Once their memories were basically wiped away, he'd try to reprogram them by forcing them to listen to looped audio messages, sometimes for 20 hours a day. And the result? It was catastrophic. His patients were left permanently damaged, unable to speak, unable to recognize their own families, incontinent, just completely broken.
The human cost of MKUltra wasn't just measured in broken minds, though. It was also measured in lives. And that brings us to the story of the program's most famous victim, a man named Frank Olson. Frank Olson was a U.S. Army biochemist, and he worked very closely with Sidney Gottlieb on biological weapons. So on November 19, 1953, at a CIA retreat, Gottlieb secretly spiked a bottle of Cointreau liqueur with LSD. Olson drank from it. In the days after, he had a complete psychological breakdown, became intensely paranoid, and told his bosses he wanted out of the CIA. So Gottlieb's deputy escorted him to New York City, and just 9 days after being drugged, Frank Olson plunged to his death from his 10th-floor hotel window.
For 22 years, the CIA's official story was that it was a tragic suicide, that Olson, suffering from a drug-induced depression, just took his own life. They told his family it was a work-related accident. But that story was nowhere near the whole truth.
Because over the decades, that official narrative just completely fell apart. The truth started trickling out in pieces. First, in 1975, a congressional investigation finally revealed the LSD dosing. Then, fast forward to 1994, Olson's family has his body exhumed. And what does the forensic analysis find? A massive bruise on his forehead, which was consistent with being knocked unconscious before he went out the window. The medical examiner officially reclassified his death from suicide to homicide. The belief now is that Olson was murdered because he knew too much about the CIA's darkest secrets and had become a security risk.
Now, a program this huge and this illegal, you know it can't stay secret forever. But you better believe the CIA did everything in its power to try, starting with a systematic destruction of almost all the evidence.
So in 1973, with the Watergate scandal breathing down everyone's necks and congressional oversight looking like a real threat, the CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, gave a direct order to Sidney Gottlieb, destroy everything related to MKUltra. And Gottlieb did it. They spent an entire day tearing up and burning 152 files, a near total purge of the program's history.
When he was later asked why he ordered the destruction, Helms's justification was just stunning. He claimed it wasn't to hide illegal activities from the American people. Nope. He said it was to avoid embarrassing the many prominent researchers and universities that had worked with the agency. It was all about protecting reputations, not revealing the truth.
And the cover-up almost worked. It really did. But then, in a total stroke of luck, investigators digging around on a Freedom of Information Act request in 1977 stumbled upon 7 boxes of financial documents. They were in a budget office and had somehow been missed during the Big Purge. Now, these records didn't detail the experiments, but they showed where the money went. They had the names of the institutions, the researchers, and for the first time, the true immense scope of MKUltra was exposed.
So what's the legacy of this whole rogue program? I mean, what came out of it? Well, while MKUltra ultimately failed to create some kind of real-life Manchurian candidate, its research into things like sensory deprivation and psychological stress, that didn't just disappear. It directly informed the CIA's 1963 Kubark Interrogation Manual. That manual became the literal blueprint for psychological torture methods that were used for decades, all the way from Vietnam to the War on Terror. The quest to control the mind ended up creating a doctrine for how to break it.
So, with most of the records intentionally turned to ash, we're left with this one final, chilling question. We know about the secret brothels. We know about the unsuspecting citizens being drugged. We know about the lives that were absolutely ruined. But what else happened during those 20 years? What other twisted experiments were conducted? And really, how many secrets are still buried, even today? That is the lingering shadow of Project MKUltra.